Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Good morning, I'm Karl Fitzpatrick and welcome to Business Matters. Globally renowned investor Warren Buffett once said, "Do not save what is left after spending. Instead, spend what is left after saving." Paul Bailey, the head of communications with the Irish League of Credit Unions, joins us now, and we'll be finding out if the credit union members across the country have adhered to Warren's advice during this crisis. Paul, perhaps you might start the interview by providing us with an overview of the scale of the credit union network across the island.
Thank you, Karl. Well, the Irish League of Credit Unions itself represents 334 credit unions across the island of Ireland. That includes the north of Ireland. We've roughly about 1.2 million members that are active.
Now, looking at the current COVID-19 pandemic, has the credit union network witnessed a decrease in loan applications over the past 2 months? And has it seen a spike of savings deposits being made?
Yes, there's a steady flow of savings coming through, and as one would expect in any crisis, the loan book is down. I mean, at the moment, I'm looking at today's figures. It's currently running at an average of 73% fall off in lending compared to this time last year. The largest of that would be 95%, and the smallest being 30%. That's quite a drop, and represents a real problem for credit unions in that loan interest is their main source of income.
In terms of the COVID-19 pandemic unemployment payment of $350 per week, has that prevented many of your members from requesting payment holidays on loans?
Yes, we would have anticipated some more requests for what we call forbearance. So this would be people seeking loan extensions or loan holidays or interest-only payments until things bottomed out. So we're probably looking at, it's quite low, 2.44% of loans that people are looking for forbearance on. But when you think about that, the COVID payments are still being made by the government. We don't think the effects of the pandemic has really hit people yet. So we would expect an increase in that figure as those payments begin to run out.
And have you any forecast in terms of once the COVID payments stop, what percentage of those do you expect will be on looking for forbearance?
I would probably think it will probably rise to about 10% of borrowers. Now, again, it's difficult to say because different people will face different circumstances. Some people may be coming from households where both have lost their jobs or have been temporarily laid off. Others may be coming from households where there's still a wage coming in. So we would hope not to see it too high, but we would still expect that to rise, somewhere around between 10 and 15%.
Now, I know that you're preparing a submission at the moment about how credit unions have effectively been ignored by government during this crisis. Now, we won't go into too much detail about this as the document has yet to be published, but what is the general sentiment in the Irish League of Credit Unions at present?
There's a general feeling that the credit unions have been, since the crisis began, we were listed as an essential service, and credit unions have been, literally putting their shoulder to the wheel and putting their staff on the front line on a daily basis to remain open, and putting staff, let's be honest about it, putting staff members at risk. So we're a bit sort of taken aback that when we requested a number of measures, support measures from the central bank, from the regulator, to enable us to support credit unions, we basically got a rejection of everything we proposed. So our members are really angry that the central bank have not literally given anything. When we look across Europe and we look across the world, other regulators are helping out with not just banks but credit unions as well.
And Paul, what type of supports is the Irish League of Credit Union looking for from government?
Well, for example, if I could just take two, one is around what we call the regulatory reserve. Credit unions are required to keep 10% of their income as part of a regulatory reserve in capital. So we've been asking the central bank to reduce the regulatory reserve from 10% to 8%, which will then free up something in the region of 900 million to be lent out and to be what we call provisioning for loans that are lent out. So we have to provide for every loan that's lent out. So that would free up a lot of that capital that's currently tied up, just sitting there doing nothing. The other piece we're looking at is the area of levies. There are a number of levies that credit unions are subject to, such as an industry funding levy, which was changed last year by the minister when he increased the industry funding levy from 9% to 50% over the next 3 years. This is a huge increase for credit unions. So what we're seeking is the minister would sign an order instructing the central bank not to collect those levies for at least a period of 12 months, which will allow credit unions to recover.
Well, I wish you well in your continuing lobbying campaign to get those across the line. Since January last, the central bank has permitted credit unions to undertake longer-term lending, which includes home mortgages and business lending. Are credit unions actively providing term lending products now? And if so, how did the network set about developing a foothold in these markets, as traditionally they've been dominated by the pillar banks?
Yes, I mean, I think it was a revelation to people, last year that the credit unions were now entering the mortgage market. So here at the Irish League of Credit Unions, we set up a mortgage hub. It's called CU Home. And what we do then, the number of credit unions have signed up for that service. And what CU Home does then is provide the underwriting and the background checks for any mortgage that's applied through those member credit unions. The decision to grant the mortgage is still done at local level by the credit union. That's one of the selling points of credit unions, that lending decisions are made at a local level and not at a head office of a bank in Dublin, far removed from the local bank in Kerry or wherever it is around the country. So that's one way that we've got involved. Credit unions are also involved in SME lending, and they can, I think it's a limit of they can reach 10% of their long-term lending can be over a period of 10 years. So it's an amalgamation of mortgages and business lending. Now, some credit unions, some of the bigger credit unions I've been talking to, they've already reached their limits, so they're very frustrated. So they have money to lend, but they can't lend anymore because they've tied up most of their money in mortgages, so they can't get into SME lending, and that's a real source of frustration, because we know that when this recovery comes about, there's a lot of small businesses out there that will need loans to get back on their feet, and credit unions are open and willing to lend where they can, where they're still within their lending limits. And
Paul, what type of loans are you now providing to businesses across the country?
I think, if a quick cross section, you'll get restaurants and bars, for example, that are currently closed, hairdressers that are currently closed, but will just need a little bit of working capital to keep going till they can open up again. So you're finding, loans ranging between 5,000 and up to 15,000, just to allow that bit of working capital, which will allow them to keep going at this time. I think as businesses begin to open up more, the requirement for more lending may become evident, and again, as I say, credit unions have those resources to lend. I mean, I think it's worth mentioning as well here that credit unions, have up to $1 billion to lend to the government to aid the recovery. There was a government bond issued last month by the NTMA for $6 billion. I think it's 84% of that money came from outside the country. So we have money here to lend. We'd love to have a conversation with the NTMA around how we can make that happen, lend it to the government at a 0% interest rate, because we're not getting any money on investments at the minute. So why not put it into a government bond where we know it's safe?
Credit unions were recently announced as one of Ireland's most trusted organisations. Why do you think that credit unions have developed this reputation amongst the public?
I think, number one, because they're still remaining open in many towns across Ireland where banks are closing. People can still come in and meet somebody. They can sit down with a loan officer, discuss their situation. They can save regularly. They'll meet a friendly face. I think the key to this is credit unions don't call their customers customers. They call them members. So there's almost like a familiarity, I suppose, for want of a better word, between the credit union staff and their member. They know them by first name. They can come in, they'll talk to them, they'll treat them as individuals, they'll look at their case on an individual basis. I think credit unions as well, within their local communities, offer huge support to local clubs and sporting bodies. drama societies, any type of organisation, a voluntary organisation, they offer huge support in terms of sponsorship. And that really resonates with people because they see credit unions as part of their community.
And Paul, finally, looking beyond the COVID-19 pandemic, what is the Irish League of Credit Unions' outlook for the economy over the next few years?
Well, I think like the rest of the country, the economy, the outlook for the economy is quite grim. Now, in saying that, I think the recovery will start to come, quarter one next year. I think our challenge now is to try and keep credit unions open as long as possible. And I mean that, not just at the moment, but in the long term, because some of our smaller credit unions have no doubt will suffer during this time because of, as what I've said, the loss of income and the higher costs. So we're hoping to try and maintain that presence in the community I talked about so that people have a viable alternative.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Paul Bailey, Head of Communications with the Irish League of Credit Unions, and I would like to thank Paul for joining me on this morning's show.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast.